Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking on a concept that, well, it feels like it should be straightforward, something we all think we get, fascism.
Right.
But our source material for this deep dive, it's an essay called Your Fascism Checklist Won't Save You, Sweetiepie.pdf. It's by Chris Abraham, who, interestingly, describes himself as having been downvoted across 3 continents, and he really challenges those easy definitions.
Exactly. And that's really our mission today, isn't it?
Mm.
To unpack the complexities Abraham raises, especially, his critique of how Umberto Eco's famous 14 signs of fascism get used.
Okay.
And just to clarify for everyone, Eco wasn't laying out like a strict checklist for one ideology. He was describing fascism, that's UR, as more of an archetype, the underlying currents that pop up in different forms.
Like the cult of tradition, rejection of modernism, that sort of thing.
Precisely. Or the obsession with a plot. So the goal here is really to help you move beyond, let's say, superficial checklists and look at the deeper historical, maybe cultural currents.
Okay, so Abraham kicks things off with a personal story, pretty vivid, actually.
Yeah.
He talks about going into this online community, Armadas. He expected, I think he says, a DMV, something kind of formal, bureaucratic maybe.
Right, structured.
But instead, he found what felt like a Renaissance fair. And, well, he got downvoted into oblivion, as he puts it.
For what?
For basically suggesting nuance, especially about Donald Trump and Eco's list. The specific comment that got him excommunicated was, Trump isn't more fascist than any other U.S. president except maybe Carter.
Wow.
And then he adds, you don't become a global hegemon by being a global sweetie pie.
What do you make of that kind of reaction to just suggesting nuance? Well, it really speaks to Abraham's core criticism, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He argues people often grab Eco's 14 signs and use them almost like a BuzzFeed quiz.
Or a vision board glued to a fridge, I think he said.
Exactly. It takes this really complex academic idea and just flattens it into copy pasta.
Yeah.
You lose all the, the critical thought behind it.
Like looking at sheet music and thinking you understand the whole symphony.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
And he actually has a term for this kind of simplification. He calls it radical chic or aesthetic resistance.
Aesthetic resistance.
Yeah. He sees it as people LARPing the French resistance with Canva templates, swapping actual sit-ins for Instagram carousels,
Okay.
and collecting baby vanguards, not really to train them, but just to post about them online.
So it's performative.
Seems like it. He gives examples like Keffieh's bought cheap off AliExpress or Solidarity that's sponsored by Temu. It's pretty biting, isn't it?
It really is. And he connects this to what he terms the neoliberal revolutionary, someone he basically paints as allergic to complexity and maybe addicted to moral signaling.
Right.
And that really makes you wonder, what is the actual impact? What happens when resistance becomes, more of a fashion statement? Does it weaken the message or maybe even backfire?
That's a big question. And this whole idea of fashion and vibes, it takes an even bigger turn when Abraham argues something really provocative.
What's that?
He says America didn't just catch fascism from Europe. He says, we exported the vibes.
Exported the vibes.
Yeah. Cultivating what he calls an aesthetic empire. That's a really striking phrase. What's he getting at with aesthetic empire?
Well, he's suggesting it's a power structure built maybe less on explicit declarations of war or direct control and more on imagery, branding, cultural influence.
Okay.
And he backs us up with quite a few historical examples. Like, he points out the U.S. had manifest destiny long before Hitler came up with Lebensraum. He says, pretty starkly, that American eugenics programs were like literal study guides for the Nazis.
Oof.
And that Jim Crow laws actually made German lawyers jealous. His point is that America's own version of, let's say, totalitarianism has often been dressed in denim and dipped in Coca-Cola, packaged differently.
And those comparisons he makes are really sharp. He says, we don't build ovens, we build zoning laws.
Right.
We don't declare martial law, we train allies. That really hits hard, doesn't it? Makes you rethink what power even looks like.
Absolutely. And he also throws in, IBM before Enigma, Wounded Knee before Kristallnacht.
So the timeline.
The timeline matters. So he argues, unlike maybe classic fascist regimes that he says fell under their own aesthetic weight, America kind of wraps it in playlist.
Wraps it in a playlist.
Yeah, it's a chilling way to put it. Suggests our power structures might be more, insidious, because they're so woven into the culture, almost invisible sometimes.
Which brings us right up to today, and specifically how Abraham talks about Donald Trump.
Right, the Trump factor.
He observes that for some people, Trump is this kind of 2D, dotard, Sauron hybrid,
Yeah.
Someone whose presence just automatically lights up all 14 of ECO's signs.
Like a checklist bingo.
Exactly. But Abraham suggests that for these critics, the real sin is often just aesthetic vulgarity, implying they don't hate that Trump is fascist, they hate that he's tacky about it. What's the weight of that critique?
Well, it suggests the focus might be on the surface, right? On the style, the presentation, not necessarily the underlying power stuff or the authoritarian potential. Now, to be fair, the source material does include an appendix with what it calls the Midas-Touch perspective.
Okay, what's that view?
That perspective argues that Trump does do things like glorify a mythic past, attack the press, use scapegoats, build cults of personality, incite political violence, corrupt institutions, and show contempt for democratic norms.
Right.
And they explicitly call these textbook fascist tactics.
Right.
Tactics that, in their view, Trump revels in, maybe unlike Bush or Obama.
Okay, so that's the counter-argument presented, but Abraham pushes back on that too, right?
He does. His immediate counter is that this view is only shocking to people who didn't live through other stuff the U.S. has done.
So he's really hitting on historical amnesia there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He brings up examples like the Patriot Act, Gitmo, warrantless surveillance, the lies leading up to the Iraq War, even Obama's drone kill list.
Right, things that definitely sparked debate at the time.
For sure. And he mentions Naomi Wolf, how she warned about fascism under Bush back in 2007 in her book, The End of America. Abraham says she wasn't wrong, just early.
Interesting.
And adds that today's resistance borrows her tone but leaves out the timeline, which, really forces us to think about how history, or forgetting history, shapes how we react to things now. It's not just about now, it's about the whole trajectory.
Yeah, that context seems crucial to his argument, which leads to another really key distinction he makes between exemplarism and exceptionalism.
Okay, explain those.
He uses Jimmy Carter, who he calls his favorite president, as the example of exemplarism, the idea that America should lead by example, not by force or dominance.
Humility.
Exactly. And he shares this little personal story, shaking Carter's hand on a Delta flight, not private, not even a government plane, just Delta. It's a really potent image, right?
It is. Sets up the contrast nicely.
Right. It contrasts with exceptionalism, which is, well, the belief that America is inherently better, special, maybe above the rules that apply to others.
Gotcha. Two very different ways of seeing America's role in the world.
Totally. And Abraham argues these offer really different paths. Now, the source material helpfully includes this fact check and BS check section. It kind of boils down his arguments.
Oh, that's useful. Let's go through it.
Okay. First claim. America is fascist. What's the verdict?
It says false, but not innocent.
Okay, unpack that, but not innocent.
The explanation is that, America has authoritarian tools, but the argument is they get rotated democratically. So, not fascist in the classic sense, but definitely not blameless. That qualifier is key.
Right. Keeps you thinking. Okay, next. Trump is the most fascist president ever.
That gets it debatable. It notes his aesthetics are fascist-friendly, sure, but his actual policy accomplishments may be less sweeping than, say, Bush's. Again, it's that style versus substance thing in Abraham's view.
Makes sense. How about eco-predicted Trump?
That's rated true-ish. Because Eco warned about tendencies, the general mood, not specific people. So Trump might fit the mood, but maybe not the mold exactly.
Gotcha. Not a prophecy, more a pattern recognition.
Exactly. And then it confirmed Naomi Wolf was right about Bush.
Okay.
And it affirms Carter as the most exemplarist president. Adding beautifully. True and beautiful. Shook my damn hand and coach.
Love that personal touch. So what's the big takeaway Abraham wants us to get from all this fact-checking and nuance?
I think the source sums it up perfectly. Eco didn't say all fascist movements have these 14 points. He said you know it when enough of them pile up.
Right.
That requires judgment, not hashtags. It's not about ticking boxes or, quick social media dumps.
It's about critical thinking, context.
Exactly. And in this age of just constant information, constant noise, this deep dive really hammers home how important it is to think critically, to look past the vibes maybe, or the surface stuff. Understanding something like fascism, it demands real judgment from you, the listener. It demands historical context, not just reacting to a meme or, how something looks on the surface.
So thinking about the listener then, what does this deep dive really mean for you? What does it actually look like to, as Abraham puts it, stop relying on vibes?
Yeah, or to read history.
And to think about how we might dismantle systems, not just symbols, rather than, just retiring the Canva posts.
It's a challenge. What context might you be missing when you scroll through your feed or hear the news? How could looking deeper, looking historically, change how you see things today?
A lot to think about there. Definitely pushes beyond the easy answers.